Thank you so much. What a perfect setup Jay just gave me. But first of all, thanks very much to everybody involved here. Kevin and Kate, you're awesome partners to help put this together in North Hills. What a great venue this is. But more than that, really, just working with the MGA. It's one of my favorite meetings every year because it's such a great group to work with. They're friends, they're colleagues, we think alike, which is dangerous. When somebody thinks the same way I do, I always get a little bit nervous. Sustainability, that's a buzzword that maybe has the potential to put people to sleep, and hopefully I can make it a little bit more lively than it might be, because it really is an issue we all need to think of, regardless if you're at that highest level club or one that's struggling to keep the doors open, as Jay referred to it. That's a good way to look at it. So, sustainability, what is it? I need to give you a little bit of background. First of all, most of the time we're thinking of it in terms of, environmental. I think that was at least the first connotation most people had of sustainability. And then it sort of morphed to include economic. But we're working in a game. And so if you don't think about enjoyment, if you don't think about fun, I think you're kind of missing the boat with sustainability, because ultimately, if what we're doing isn't fun, then we're doing it wrong, because it's supposed to be fun, and by golly, it better be fun. So, little quick history lesson, what started the discussion? Well, I really think of it as having been kicked off by the quote-unquote environmental movement of the 1980s. If you were in the business back then, if you didn't feel like you're under attack now, you really felt like it back in the 80s. And until really the early 90s, we did not know if we had a good story or a bad story to tell. So golf was kind of just burying, as a group, we buried our heads in the sand. We didn't want to address the issue, and as time progressed, we had to, and ultimately we did. Now, the economic aspect probably hit home in 2008, and as Jay said, that has had a significant impact on the game. Certainly impacted rounds played, but that's not the only reason rounds played have gone down. I think the biggest concern is the decline in participation. And yes, courses closed, and other courses started allowing pay for play when they had been a private club for a long time. And then water usage. We don't think of water usage being a big issue in the Northeast, but if you're around in the late 90s, early 2000s, we had historic droughts then, and probably 10 to 15 years prior to that. But on average, we don't really worry about it too much. But obviously, other areas of the country have to. The Southeast a few years ago, and Southern California right now, and in the late 70s. At the annual meeting in 2010, the USGA annual meeting, Jim Hyler mentioned this phrase that really got picked up and thrown around, and it was brown is the new green. And everybody, frankly, me included, initially thought, oh my God, he's talking about water, and he's saying we need to shut it off and let our courses go brown and play firm and fast. Water was part of the thought process behind those comments, but it wasn't the only thing by a long stretch. It really he was talking about sustainability. Now, his view was sort of shaped by that drought that they experienced in the Southeast in the late 2000s. His own course had a major issue. They had an antiquated irrigation system. They updated it, did a lot of work on it, and they were amazed at how much water they could save. And that was a real critical thing back then. So really, this comment, this phrase, brown is the new green, refers to sustainability. Water initially, but to all facets of the game. And one of the fundamental issues that we have in this game is we have forever relied on legacy thinking. I mean, golf's loaded with tradition, right? And so it's not easy to think outside the box sometimes. It's easy to think, it's always worked in the past, we're going to continue to do it, why would we change it? But we need to think outside the box. And it's not that we need to lose our traditions, we don't. We've got tons of wonderful traditions. I think that's one of the coolest things about the game. But I think we've really become complacent in a lot of different regards, and there's no denying how much the world has changed. You just think about computers and smartphones and what we can do now. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But all of those things have filtered into golf, and so golf is changing. And as Jay pointed out, participation was down way before the economic downturn hit. It's really down, and we need to look at that. That's not a good thing. Pace of play is going down. You know, we need the pace of play to pick it back up. And obviously expenses are rising. So all these things are going to be covered by a little bit by me, but really more by other speakers today. And the idea is that I was going to kick it off and then kind of set up the rest of the speakers. But the bottom line is we need to think about sustainability, regardless of whether you're doing really well at your facility or whether you're really not doing well. This is the only stat I'll give you, but here's the rounds of golf played from the NGF from 2005 to 2012. And many of you would say, oh, of course, it follows the economic downturn, and it does. But remember, there was a big dip before this graph even showed up. So talk about participation. You know, why is it down? Well, you know, golf is perceived as being exclusive, and not to anyone in this room, I'm sure, but to a novice, somebody that really doesn't have the history, didn't grow up in the game, it's really intimidating if you stop to think about it. You got to know how to dress, which is an interesting thought we won't go into. You have to know the etiquette, the rules, where to stand, when to stand there, when not, where not to stand, when to talk, when not, all that stuff. It comes as second nature to us because we've been in the game for so long, but it is not second nature. Everything has to be concentrated on for a beginner. Certainly it's expensive, and you can say, well, you know, once you get into it, it's not so much. It's expensive to try it for a lot of people, and it's intimidating to try it. So two good reasons why you don't necessarily want to take a flyer and try it. And obviously the time issue. It is time consuming to play. But more than anything else, this just really bothers me. Golf is a lousy recruiter, and having two kids that tried golf but really didn't stick with it, they played tennis, they swam, played lacrosse. Other sports are way better at recruiting than golf is. You know, traditionally, the way golf is recruited, it's a junior golf program for 1 day a week for 8 weeks every summer, and that's it. What kind of a recruiting program is that? That's a joke. When you think about lacrosse or baseball or basketball, kids are encouraged to play spring, summer, fall, winter. Maybe it's football you're playing or you're working out. It's all the other sports compete for our kids' times and do a much better job of it than golf does. And that's especially true of kids and of women as well. The caddy program, you know, a lot of courses no longer have caddies. So what's the significance? Well, a lot of people came into the game having started as a caddy. How many of you or your fellow private club members got their start caddying, and that was a big aspiration as they were growing up? I want to be a member here. I don't want to be a caddy. I want to be a member here someday. So we don't have people being indoctrinated through a caddy program coming into the game very often anymore. And this point was made in our organizational meeting. I'll give Jerry Kunkel credit because I thought it was profound. But he said, you know, we're losing golfers and we're gaining non-golfers. What are we talking about? That as older people age out of the game, they're the traditionalists, they've got the history, the tradition, they're gone, and they're replaced by these guys. And you all know this movie, you can probably quote 80% of it, but they don't know the history, they don't know the tradition. Are they the root of the problem for pace of play? Probably not, but they're certainly a contributing factor. So participation is down, and we need to do a better job of recruiting. I've gone years doing course consulting visits, years without seeing a lot of kids on a golf course. To the point when I see kids on a golf course, if I happen to be at a course on the junior golf day, I whip out my camera, and in this day and age, that makes people nervous when you see them see somebody taking pictures of your kids. Almost need to sign a waiver here. Notice none of the kids are facing me, so. But I get excited seeing this. And at this particular course, they have 150 kids in the junior golf program. It drives the superintendent nuts. He cannot get anything done, absolutely anything, on this one day. But wow, is that cool for the future of the game? Because some of those kids are going to get hooked and they're going to stay in it for a lifetime. The challenge there is that this is not an overnight solution. This is a generational solution. You know, you've got to wait for these kids to grow up and maybe have families of their own to really start seeing the effect of this kind of a recruiting program. So it is never too soon to start being more aggressive and giving the kids as much as golf as they want, and increasing their opportunities to play the game. And here's my tip of the day. I've mentioned this before, but I think it'll work. you let the girls play for free, and I guarantee you're going to get more boys. So keep that one in mind. So to be successful golf, I think we obviously have to recruit. I think we really need to target women and youth. And as I look around, I see how many women are here. What the heck? Maybe we should do this for the ladies. Maybe we should have this meeting for the ladies. The next thing, though, is culture. And I've talked about this a couple of times this morning already. It's amazing when I do visits, I go into some courses and everybody's grumpy. Everybody's complaining about the bunkers, the fairways, the greens, the whatever. And I've said many times, probably you've heard me say it, but attitudes, moods are contagious. So if one or two or three people are in a grumpy mood, pretty soon that's transferred to most people. By contrast, I go into some other courses and boy, things can be going poorly. You know, membership's down, the mowers are breaking, we don't have enough money to replace them all, we can't solve this problem, we can't solve that one. But people are there with a great attitude because they have made a conscious decision to come to the golf course, come to the club, and have fun. And those are the clubs I would want to be with. I like being around people that put me in a good mood. I do not need to be around grumpy, whining other people. So think about the attitude, and it starts with staff, and it transfers to golfers. So, you know, it's not just the golfers, it's not just the staff. We all need to have a positive mind outlook, outset. Obviously, we need to control costs, and you know, I think if you're at a high-level course with a lot of money, you know, ask yourself: are we doing this because we can, or are we doing this because it's important? And a lot of times, a lot of the things we do it because we can, or maybe we're listening to the grumpy ones. So we need to look at controlling costs, and through all this, we got to maintain our traditions, because that's what really separates golf, I think, from a lot of other sports. The end of the day, I think we have to look at overindulgent cosmetics, and I wish I could say I coined that phrase because I love it. Kind of like polar vortex, it makes you feel smart when you say it. But overindulgent cosmetics are something we need to look hard at, and I'm going to explain that. So pretty much sounds easy, right? Everybody get in a better mood, you know, spend a little bit less, take it down a notch, piece of cake. Probably not so much. It's going to take a lot of education. So I've never been a huge fan of the Golf Digest ranking system, but Ron Whitten came up with this change a couple of years ago, several years ago actually, and I'm just going to read it. I'm sure you can, but I'll do it too. We abandoned the idea the course should have lush, that's a 4-letter word, not a good one for golf, green, perfectly uniform grass, and adopted the position that, you know, dry and firm provides the best conditions for playing golf. And I would agree with that. Having said that, I'm not prepared to tell you to turn off the water. That's way too oversimplistic. And I think this was really more to the point that I was getting at. Great conditions are not straight mowing patterns in the rough or uniform lies in bunkers. Those are overindulgent cosmetics. So as you think about overindulgent cosmetics, I think you'll find them all over your golf course. And if you grew up playing, you know, not country club conditions, you'll think back to the days when you played Bethpage before the grand renovation or any other public course. You still had a good time. It's not like we have to have perfect conditions to have a good time. You just have to enjoy playing golf, and then you can enjoy playing a lot of different kinds of conditions. So transitioning into economic sustainability, I don't think anybody would argue golf costs too much. It's much cheaper in Europe, and there's a lot of reasons why it's more expensive here. But I think quality is probably the number one reason it's gotten more expensive. And to put things in, you know, grossly oversimplified form, smaller and lighter almost always means better when you're talking about turf grass and playing conditions. Meaning smaller and lighter equipment gives you healthier turf, better playing conditions, and so on. Smaller and lighter means more money. That means not one large mower, it's multiple smaller mowers, and then you have to have multiple people to run them and more mechanics to take care of them, so you can see how it snowballs. But the reason we've gone with this theory, and it holds true in almost, well, certainly in most cases, because the turf gets better and better and the playing conditions get better and better. So it's not that we want to undo quality, we just need to separate quality from overindulgent cosmetics, and that is the challenge, to differentiate. Flower beds, oh my gosh, keep them by the clubhouse, but on the golf course, that to me is an overindulgent cosmetic. Ball washers, do we really need 3 per hole? Benches, hell, half the people, no, 3/4 of the people ride. Why do we have benches if everybody rides? And the people that, well, we've got to wait because of the pace, well, it all kind of bundles in together. And then the striping and the green lush, that's again a 4-letter word. And consistency, and I'll tell you what, USGA needs to take some blame for this because we've talked a lot about consistency, and we have changed our thinking dramatically in championship setup. I think you all have watched our championships probably in recent years, and they're very different now than they were 10 years ago or more. And one of the things that we talk a lot about now is consistency, and we talk about it in a negative term. It's not that we would purposely want you to make your course consistent or inconsistent. We just don't want you to knock yourselves out making it consistent. So how could we save money in golf? I'm not going to spend very much time on this because there's so many things that we can do, but really it's just kind of thinking about things and questioning whether they're really important. We could cut down fairway acreage, we could return clipping instead of remove them. These are a lot of things people are doing right now because they have to, because budgets are being tightened at a lot of courses. The 2 things I want to just touch on real briefly are mowing patterns in the intermediate cut. I've been a proponent for getting rid of the intermediate cut for a very long time. I lose the argument at most of the courses I visit, but if you want to read a little bit about it, this was in the Green Section Record last July. Waste of time and resources. Basically, it was a repeat of an article one of my other colleagues, Pat O'Brien, wrote about 15 years ago. And it'll go through all the money-saving implications and why it's just not a good thing for most golf courses. But it translates, in my mind, to winter problems, summer problems, and added expense, and it hurts aesthetics. It reduces definition between fairway and rough. So the vast majority of the courses I visit, at least 90, probably 95 or more percent, shouldn't have an intermediate cut. They'd be better off. They'd have a more attractive and better playing golf course without it, and they'd save a few dollars. Mowing patterns, stripes are so important to some courses, but here's an old traditional looking course with a modern look with the stripes. And some of you probably don't even notice it, or maybe you think, wow, those stripes look really cool. But they cost money. It's a lot less efficient to mow with the black and white pattern here than with a stripe pattern. Same mowers, more time for the stripes. So you can have a little bit less labor spent, a little bit less fuel spent. You can have your equipment last a little bit longer and have a cleaner look by adopting this look. That to me is the epitome of overindulgent cosmetics. The painted frog rock, in case you couldn't figure out what that was. In some clubs, some group of the members will say, well, we'll put in the gardens and we'll maintain them. And we know how well that works, right? They put them in, and then pretty soon they turn to weeds, and nobody else knows that it wasn't the superintendent that was supposed to take care of it. And so you catch the blame when it looks like hell. So bunker maintenance, almost everybody I can think of has taken bunker maintenance down a notch, and I think that's a really good thing. I'd like to take it down a few more notches. And perhaps the key to that is just getting golfers to rake them. But they can't be consistent, and they're very expensive to build, to maintain, and they're an area that you're not supposed to want to go to. So it just is wrong that we spend so much money trying to make them perfect. One of the interesting things that happens at every championship that we host, we remove at least half and oftentimes 3/4 of the rakes from the golf course. We purposely do that because we don't want them to come into play. This particular course, it was a site of a women's open a couple of years ago. You could walk across some of the bunkers on the rakes. There were that many there. You could bend over in any direction, any of 360 degrees, and pick up a rake in some locations. So they're expensive, yeah, but it's an investment. You can buy a rake and it lasts for a long time. But think about how much time you waste and how much raking and mowing operations are slowed down by picking them up and moving them for all of those things. So, and then of course they detract from the aesthetics of the course. You see, I think the design feature of this bunker is the rake, for heaven's sakes, not the bank. So, and there's so many accessories. Oh my God, everywhere you look, we've got accessories. And I know I've shown this slide before, but there are money-saving tips. Somebody pointed out to me last week that they do have brown duct tape now, and that's going to be a turf tip for next year, I think. The point is, all those accessories are expensive to buy, maintain, and you don't realize how many you have. Superintendents realize it twice a year, in the spring when they put them out, in the fall when they take them back in. It's a lot of time and money wasted for staff to move them, relocate them, maintain them, bring them in and out, et cetera, et cetera. So what about firm and fast? I would call that a return to the traditions of the game, which is a great thing. It's certainly good for playability. My favorite championships to watch are when they're firm and fast. You watch the ball bouncing and running, you see creative shots being hit, really fun, and it brings hazards more into play. I would argue that if you dry things out, and you might be able to increase cutting heights a little bit, which is, I know, a sacrilege because nobody ever wants to give up any speed, but it could improve turf health. However, it can go the other way. If you, and I've discouraged courses from doing this. If you say, we're going to have it dry and firm and fast, and you're still going to have cart traffic, when you drive carts over drought-stressed turf, you can damage it, or you can kill it in some cases. So in some areas of the country, Bermuda grass down in the southeast, Bob Farron's going to talk in a little while about this, reducing water usage is a great thing. It'll save them a lot of money. And when Bermuda grass, turns brown because of dormancy, you turn the water back on, and then 3 or 4 days later it greens back up. That's not the case with a lot of our grasses. So I think of reducing water usage is a hugely important thing in certain areas of the country, the west, the southwest, in some cases the southeast, but not so much in the northeast. Not that it's not important, it's just not necessarily going to save us money. So environmental sustainability, I think we initially considered it as a challenge, as a problem. But the reality is, most golfers, I would guess probably everybody in this room is an environmentalist. I certainly am. Most superintendents are. And golf, after initially being resistant, feeling attacked in the 80s, I would say have embraced the movement. We've really changed how we maintain golf courses for the better. We're doing a much better job. We do a good job of regulating ourselves. You'll hear about that in the BMP update later on. By the same token, we still have a long way to go. We need to be better stewards. I think we always had a lot of wildlife on our golf courses, but we sure see it a lot more now because we're thinking about it and we're doing a better job of encouraging it. There are economic and environmental reasons to naturalize stream banks, which was not something that you would see 25 years ago. It was odd to see this. 25 years ago, we would look at this and say, oh my God, look at all those weeds. We don't have weed eaters? Come on, let's get this cleaned up. The truth is, you can save a ton of money, a lot of labor, by not string trimming them all the time. And the economic or the environmental benefit is tremendous. Because when you do that, all those grass clippings are going into the water, putting nutrients in there. That's really bad for water quality. And if you string trim it enough, then you wind up with terrible erosion problems, which are very expensive to fix, really unsightly. And this was a common thing we would see 25 years ago. Because we don't do as much of this, you don't see eroded banks anywhere near as often as you used to. But we can take it too far. Here's a beautiful natural area that was created in upstate New York. We're not happy. Why? It's too thick. In these naturalized rough areas, Jim Skrolski is going to talk about, if you maintain them with very few inputs, that'll save you money. It's really good, environmentally speaking, but you're not going to find a golf ball in there. And if you want thin and wispy, and you don't have the right conditions for it, it's going to cost you a lot of money. It would be cheaper just to mow it down. So you have to think carefully about what you're doing. There are always unintended consequences you have to keep in mind. So environmental sustainability, we've actually been working on it since 1921. That's when the green section was created, just didn't call it that back then. And what really spurred us on was the drought in California in the late 70s. Here's a picture of it. That was in the green section record back in the late 70s. People were running out of water. We had extreme restrictions, and hey, guess what? It's happening again. Big surprise. But this is closer to home. I mentioned the drought we had in the late 90s, early 2000s. That's the Cannonsville Reservoir, and over on the right side of the screen, those are boats. That's down about 10 feet or 15 feet. And obviously, we finally came through it, but if you were in turf in the early 2000s, you faced restrictions. If you were in New Jersey, you had a mandatory cutback 1 year of 80%. So it can happen here, and it's important to think about. So USGA spent a ton of money on it. The first 60 years we spent about $1 million, but really kicked off by that drought in the late 70s in California from 1983 to present. We're up to pretty close to $40 million in turfgrass research. We're the largest private funder of turfgrass research in the world, and the work does a lot of different things, but we've tried to develop better grasses, really funded programs that produce the grasses, and funded the work that went into developing the BMPs here and in other states, and certainly all these other important things, water conservation, et cetera, period. We've really tried to encourage more responsible management, environmentally responsible management. Some of that was done through the Audubon program, which was terrific, and I think as a result, golf has gotten a lot of accolades from this obviously large national publication, National Geographic. But when we present what we're doing to environmental organizations, as a rule, they're thrilled, they're shocked, they had no idea in most cases what golf was doing to improve our situation, and they have no idea of the great story golf has to tell. But TV teaches us that everything should be green or lush, that we should never have bad lies in bunkers or roughs or any of these things. The green should be receptive and, of course, lightning fast. And to some degree, all of these things, I think, are overindulgent cosmetics, always in terms of degrees. Because tournament golf itself isn't sustainable. You got 1 million volunteers, tons of loaner equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And it gives golfers, the average golfer, an unrealistic view of the game, and they don't really get the behind-the-scenes look that would teach them otherwise. And I think in many cases the assumption is golfers want to see birdies, so let's make it not too firm, the right speed, a consistent speed, and clean up the bunkers. Somebody shooting 59 makes worldwide news, and that's good for sponsors. So what are our philosophies? Bunkers cannot be consistent. They just can't. We've tested following raking, following playing, and you'll find easily with a True Firm device that firmness changes after one golfer has hit a shot. So if you're complaining about your bunkers not being consistent, you probably have a legitimate concern, because they can't be and they shouldn't be. We purposely don't want roughs to be consistent, and you're going to hear a lot more about this from Bob in a little bit. Heck, their fairways at Pinehurst for 2 opens this year may not even be consistent. We want to get golfers out of their comfort zones, give them varying conditions to create uncertainty, to make them think, make them make decisions, and to change the setup so that they're on the edge, they're not comfortable. And here I think sums up the reason why. This is Alistair McKenzie's quote from his book, The Spirit of St. Andrew. It's possible to have too high a degree of perfection. If we've never had a bad lie, we're not likely to appreciate a good one. Moreover, the ability to play from a bad lie differentiates between a good player and a bad one. I think that's it in a nutshell. Having said that, we are our own worst enemies. We've become incredibly adept at keeping weak turf alive, and that's a good thing in some cases, not so good in others. We manage POA greens here to a large extent, and we've gotten very good at it. And the harder you work keeping weaker grasses alive, guess what you wind up with? More weaker grasses. Having said that, going the other way is a very difficult thing to do. But maintaining unreliable turf, whether it's a summer stress problem or the winter damage that we probably have escaped for the most part in this area this year, we will not escape at some point in the relatively near future. We're going to have a bad winter, and we're going to lose grass because we don't have very reliable turf. A lot of courses could regrass and change this, but that's difficult to accomplish. Last point I wanted to make was speed versus firmness, because speed is so incredibly important to golfers, because they know what it means. A 9 is not as good as a 10, as 11, as a 12, whatever. In our championships, if you give us a choice between speed and firmness, you can have one but not necessarily the other. Every single time we're going to go for firmness, because there are a lot of lousy golfers that can handle fast greens. That's, you know that, you've seen them, and you are one, but you've certainly played with one. There are no lousy golfers that can handle firm conditions. That does a much better job of differentiating between good players and not so good players. So just kind of wrapping it all up, we clearly have tons of challenges. Every sport has challenges. Glad I'm not in football right now with the issues they have to deal with. But golf has a lot of things going for us. I mean, the history, the tradition, it's a wonderful game. You can play it for a lifetime, et cetera, et cetera. We just need to think outside the box and not necessarily rely on legacy thinking. We need to recruit. Whether you would really like to have more ladies on your golf course, you need them. It is the future of the game. Same thing with kids, even more important. I would encourage you all to think about the overindulgent cosmetics. And if I've done nothing else but get you to look differently at some of the funny things that we have on our golf course that cost money and really add nothing to the golfing experience, I would call this a success. And as always, consider the environmental impact of all the things you're doing. Bad news always sells, and it's important that golf is a good steward. All the good things get erased when one club, one superintendent, one employee makes a mistake and we have an accident. It's always something we have to be very conscious of. So with that, I will say thank you.